Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. and today I'm reviewing War Chest and the expansions Siege and Nobility. War Chest is a tactical abstract game from Trevor Benjamin and David Thompson in which you're going to be drafting your units. You're going to be drafting units on this board as you vie to put down your control chips on the various control points of the board. The game does play 2 to 4 players. We're going to ignore these sections over here for the sake of a 2-player experience as the players go ahead and take this giant deck of cards, and this deck does include all the expansion cards as well. But as you take this deck of cards and as you draft units, you're going to lay down units on the board. The players are going to go back and forth drafting the units. Alternatively, if you prefer not to do that, and for your first games I would suggest not, you also have a bunch of pre-suggested options as well as various simulated battles of history in which certain units will pair off against each other. But the general idea is you're going to place out 8 units on the board, and the players are going to draft from those units, trying to choose their specific armies. So you may have one player who has a swordsman, archers, martial, and light cavalry as the army, at which point they're going to go ahead and grab those specific units from the board. Let's go ahead and grab the swordsman over here. Let's grab the archers and the marshals, and we'll put those all in play. Once you have all the units on the board, the players are going to go ahead and take 2 of each unit, putting them into their bag to start off their starting set of units, going ahead as well as that and adding 1 of their own customized color chips to the bag that they can go ahead and use as well. Past that, the units are going to be set off to the side of the board. We can go ahead and utilize them because the players are going to need to have these in play to have the options. Let's try to put these a little bit close to the board to have the options of recruiting and drafting more units to their engine. Because in this game, every single unit has their own way that they operate. Every unit has their own way that they are going to act when the chip is pulled from the bag and what they have options to and what access to the different abilities they have. So for example, right now, let's go ahead and put these on the board, and let's show you how this game plays out with this little bag over here. Every turn, the players are going to go ahead and draw 3 chips from the bag. They're going to reach in the bag, they're going to shuffle it up, they're going to draw 3 chips, and they're going to go ahead and pick those 3 chips and secretly look at them behind their hand as they try to figure out what they want to do. From there, the players have a few options in front of them as what do they do with their chips as they go back and forth, placing a chip, the other player placing a chip, back and forth until the turn order is claimed by one of the players, changing the sequence for the next round. And what you can do with a chip is a fewfold, and it depends on the chip because you have 2 different types of chip. You have your starting single chip over here, as well as the specific chips associated with the unit type. And when you have a chip, you can always discard a chip face down to do a few things, including recruiting a new unit. So for example, I'm going to go ahead and discard this chip face down in order to grab another horseman and take my horseman and put it into my discard pile face up. So I've now taken a chip out of my reserve and I'm putting it into my discard pile where it'll eventually cycle back into my bag where I'm ready. From there, the other player takes a move, and that's fine. I'm going to go ahead and take a move, and I'm going to discard this chip, and I'm not going to discard it. I'm going to play this chip face up to put it down on one of my control points on the board. So one of the ways you're going to get units on the board is by playing the actual chip. Now, a unit on the board on its own does not have that much flexibility. You can't activate, you can't do anything, but eventually when we come back around and when we eventually draw another chip, let's find one over here, when we eventually draw our other chip over here, where we do have some access to different options now that we already have a chip on the board. We can go ahead and bolster that unit, so we can go ahead and take this chip, putting it on top of that unit, which gives it an extra degree of health the next time this unit is attacked. Instead of being removed entirely from the board, we'll simply remove the top chip, and that chip will go back into the box. It's no longer back in the system, it's gone. It's not in the play at all anymore. So playing a chip is one thing you can do with an actual chip. Bolstering a chip is one thing you can do. You can move with a chip. You can always go ahead and move or attack with a chip. A move or attack is exactly what it sounds like. Discarding a chip to move, discarding this chip over here to move, means I can move to any adjacent hex. Call it a day. I can discard this chip from my hand to attack face up and attack with this chip, which means if I have an enemy chip next to me, I can go ahead and attack that chip, removing it from the game back to the box. I can also take control of a control point. So from on top of a control point, I can discard a chip from my hand to go ahead and take control of a control point, which is how you ultimately win the game, by controlling enough control points on you with using your colors over there. And so those are the main actions you have as far as what you can do with an actual chip. But the coolest one, the one I'm a huge fan of, is the fact that there's also customized tactics for every single card, and you can discard a chip from your hand. So we can discard this chip from my hand in order to go ahead and do the tactic on the card. Sometimes there's an actual tactic. In this case, the swordsman does not have one. The swordsman has an ability where after it attacks, it also moves. But for example, if we have this horseman card over here, this horseman has a tactic that you can discard a chip. You can discard a horseman chip from your hand. If we had a horseman on the board and we wanted to discard one, we could discard the horseman chip in order to simply move, as you might expect, or to attack, as you might expect. But we can also use this tactic, which in this case is moving 2 spaces, so we can discard this to go 1, 2 over there and move across the board a bit faster. Every unit has their own tactic, or every unit has abilities of how they're different. Most units have their own tactic as far as what they can do, how they can act, crossbow men and bow and arrows, shooting at a range, various siege engines in different ways. They all have their own different engines as far as what they do. Lancers charging across the board, 2, 3 spaces in a straight line to attack. All the units have different abilities, different configurations, and you have an asymmetric setup in the sense that the other players have one set, you have your own set, and you're trying to use your set against the other in the most efficient way possible, both during the initial draft to build out your army in a way that you think will cohesively destroy your opponent, as well as in the actual execution of how you build your bag, how you react to your opponent, and what you do. And so those are basically the main actions we've talked about. We haven't talked about every single one. For the most part, though, you're going to be discarding units of a certain type to activate that unit in some way, either putting on the board, bolstering it, attacking, moving, or using a tactic. You can discard any chip face down in order to add a new unit to your bag. You can also discard any chip face down in order to change the initiative, to say that, hey, currently you're going first, but I want to go first, which can lead to a 2-turn 1-2 punch at the end of a cycle, which gives you a lot of flexibility as far as how you take down your opponent, assuming, of course, that you draw the right chips. Past that, you'll repeat the cycle of placing chips down on the board, trying to tactically reposition yourself. In general, you can only have 1 of each type on the board. You cannot have 2 of the same type of unit on the board, with some exceptions from certain units that will allow that. For the most part, every unit is going to be a single stack only and ever, which means unless you have one of those units, you'll only ever have maximum of 4 units on the board on your side, unless you're playing with teams. And that is basically what War Chest is doing. As far as what the expansions add, we have Siege and Nobility. Both of them add new units as a starting point. Both of them, I believe, add 5 units each. I think it's 5, I could be mistaken, but they both add units to the game, giving you more variety to your engine, more variety to the way you can play, and the way you can combine different things as you play War Chest. But additionally, Siege is going to add, additionally, these Siege Towers over here, with a whole bunch of variable setups as far as how they get added to the board. You can see over here, there'll be a bunch of setups as far as how those go on the board, and those provide a degree of defense on the different control points as for the players, and that defense will give you, whenever you attack a siege tower, you have to take out the siege tower first, so it gives you an extra degree of decision point as far as how, where to control, what to do, and how to be responsive to the game. And then Nobility is going to add, again, new units, but Nobility is also going to add these Royal Decree cards over here, which are cards you can add to the game, that you can add the card. Players will have their own decree tokens that they can place down a card when they activate it. Each card is activatable once, and it adds another action type to the game. So now as an action, you can go ahead and activate a decree. So for example, redeploy over here is remove a friendly unit from the board and then deploy it. So they give you a few options as far as one-time use abilities you can utilize for the game, giving you a slight spin and shift to the way you'll deal with things. And those are the expansions, Siege and Nobility. Let's talk about this. Ease of play. War Chest is a very easy game to table, especially if you've played deck building in general, where you have a better sense of the bag building aspect of what you're doing over here, so you have an idea of what you're trying to do, how you're trying to do it, the strategic differences between trying to have everything versus trying to have a focused engine. If you can have a focused engine, you can draw the same chips again and again and again, and activate the same units more frequently, but it also means you have less variety as far as the board control, as far as your flexibility. So there's different payoffs and trade-offs as far as how you build your bag, and understanding how a deck building game works will help. But past that, it's a fairly simple game with a fairly simple action sequence. You go ahead and play a chip, you draw 3 chips, take turns playing those chips to activate units or to continue building your bag or to take initiative, and rinse and repeat until you have control points. It's a fairly simple game that is only complicated by the tactics and the tactical decision of looking at a row of 8 cards and trying to think how you're going to draft an army better than your opponent does. As far as player count, this is a 2 to 4 player game. It has a team mode. I've never played the team mode. I've only played this as a 2-player direct head-to-head. I've played it a decent amount as a 2-player direct head-to-head, but I have not ever tried the team mode of the game. As far as what I like, don't like, and conceal that's not liking, starting off with the powers and abilities. All these cards, we have a chunk full of cards over here. We have a ton of cards over here, each giving you their own different power and ability as far as how they activate. Like Cavalry, move 2 spaces. Cavalry, move 1 space and then attack. We have Scouts. The Scout may be deployed adjacent to any friendly unit, completely changing the nature of the board. We have Footmen, where you can have 2 of them on the board, and you can perform a maneuver with each Footman, really giving you the opportunity to close in on your opponent in a way they don't necessarily like. When the Pikeman is attacked by an adjacent unit, remove a coin from that unit. Pikemen are highly defensive units, but there's other highly defensive units that, for instance, the Knight, for instance, is another highly defensive unit that can only be attacked by bolstered units, so an enemy single chip unit can't do anything. And the expansions add more from the War Wagons, the Bishops, the Earls, the Heralds, and the Bannermen. After the Bannermen maneuvers, you may move 1 adjacent enemy unit 1 space, again giving you a degree of control as far as how you deal with things. All these units give you a different puzzle, and the powers and abilities in War Chest, the sheer variety of the experience. There's a high degree of variability to how this game game will play out, because every combination of units will result in a different puzzle. Every combination of units will result in a different way you want to approach how you try to take control of the board state. So there's a high degree of powers and abilities, of variability, the drafting and further customization of your bag, the decision space as you play through the game. You can try to focus on one or two units so you can cycle them again and again and again. You can try to focus on attacking and defeating units, or trying to focus on control. The game gives you different pathways. The last game I played this, the very last game I played, had me slowly tearing down and destroying my opponent as he eventually won the game, because I was tearing him down while he got his last control point and ultimately won. There are different pathways as far as how you build your army, how you draft your army, how you take control of the board, all done with a very simple action selection system that gives you a lot of freedom, control, accessibility, all these good things all combined into a very simple, solid, accessible, abstract strategy game. As far as what I don't like, there's less bag building agency than I'd like in the game. That's because with the nature of having only 4 units on the board, and 2 of those chips start in the bag, and most unit types have between 4 or 5 units, that means you're left with only a handful of actual decisions you'll make across the course of the game as far as how to build your bag. For me, that choice is fairly binary, as I try to choose whether I'm trying to focus on 1 or 2 chips, or trying to just kind of gather everything in the bag, and that choice is further removed as the game continues and you find yourself with even less options as your units slowly start dwindling. I like the idea of the choice, I like the idea of it, and there is agency, 100% there's agency as far as how you choose and draft your units. I kind of wish it had more. It gives me the taste of a deck building, of a bag building game, while feeling like I want more out of the options, of the presence, of how I'm going to build things out. I feel like most of the decision space comes to how I draft my initial army, and then from there, it doesn't feel as widely varied as far as how I build out my bag. I wish there was a drop more. I wish there's more deck building, bag building in the game. And then additionally, this game does feel, very often, whenever I play it, this game to me feels like this is a game where if you're playing with 2 competent players who know what they're doing, it often feels to me like the game comes down to who gets their first lucky draw first that ends up tilting the game. What I mean by that is you have these situations where you're trying to play this little tactical dance back and forth, and the tactical dance does inherently rely on whether your opponent has more chips to go ahead and deploy, more chips to attack, more chips to control, whether you got 2 of your horsemen in one turn or whether you got none of them. I find very often it's a tactical back and forth of positioning, building, repositioning, adjusting, the occasional dance, parry, and taking down a chip, but then eventually a player manages to get 2 horsemen in a row, followed by attacking you twice, positioning your horseman, attacking you, discarding the 3rd chip to get the initiative, starting again the next cycle, hopefully attacking you again. That single turn, I often find a single good turn in an otherwise fairly anticipatable game usually is enough to tilt the game towards that player having control, towards that player having a better board state. I find it's often a dance with a degree of turnover to where that dance starts to pay off for one player over the other. In other words, I think this is a game that does have those lucky turns that can be the shift of the balance. As far as I can see others not liking, this game does have a weird mix of deck building, pulling from your bag, as well as being a very abstract strategy game. This game both heavily rewards the abstract strategy of how you anticipate, how you build, what you're trying to do. It feels very much like a chess style approach, but a chess style approach with like a, hey, go ahead and just see which one of your pieces you pull from the bag to activate this turn, which kind of takes away from it. It ends up being this weird mix of luck and of strategy at the same time, which can throw you off. If you're looking for more of a luck-based experience, well, there's a lot of strategy and decision space here. If you're looking more of a strategy-based experience, it does feel like an abstract strategy, which should have less luck with a lot of luck added. And then, additionally, it can be frustrating to have that final chip on the board. The nature of the game is such that eventually you might have your chip slowly depleted, and eventually you might have a dead chip that you can either use to build other chips, or you can use it to go ahead and just put it down the board on a control point, but now you have a dead swordsman sitting on the board because you have no more chips to activate it. As your bag dwindles, as people remove your chips and take them off the board and remove them, you have less flexibility as far as how you activate them, and that means either activate them infrequently, or eventually getting to a point where perhaps you're not activating those units at all, which can be just frustrating to have a dead chip there with just taking up space, getting in the way. Getting in the way is a good thing, but not being able to fully execute on what you want for it. As far as final thoughts on War Chest, I like War Chest, but I also never loved War Chest. War Chest to me was a game that gave me an incredible amount of powers and abilities that I really enjoyed, really dove into, had a lot of fun with the different draftings the different pools or armies that I would build out as I attempted to take down my opponents, and I had a lot of fun with what the game did, but also felt like I wanted more from the actual bag building and deck building parts of the game. I felt like my favorite part, whenever I play War Chest again, every single time, my favorite part is the initial draft as I walk into the potential of the 4 more units that will combine in different ways, that lance that will charge across the board, the bowman that gives me a bit more flexibility, that knight that gives me a bit more defense so I can take to the front lines. It's a little bit of a challenge as far as how I build my draft, and then when it comes time to actually play, I find the execution gives me a little bit less of the sense of fun than I got out of the initial draft. I also got Siege and Nobility, wondering if they change up the experience to me or give me more, and they do give me more, but they give me more in terms of the flexibility of the types of units you have. So for me, the games, I don't think mechanically speaking, the crees and the siege towers, mechanically speaking, they don't change the game up enough for me to really affect my opinion of the game. I think they are excellent for those looking for more variety to the experience, more chips. I think that's great, but they didn't improve the game nor make it worse. They just gave me more, and if you like the game, that more is a good thing. If you're more on the fence, which is where I am, then it doesn't necessarily change up the experience for me. I like War Chest. It's a solid game. It is a lot to enjoy here, but for me, I think the biggest thing that I end up walking away from is I feel like that abstract luck balance to me feels a drop out of place. The fact that I have a ton of fun building my army, like I almost wish they had the same game but without the bag building, just with the army building, just with, hey, give me those cars and let me figure out how to build an army that marches across the board, but with an action selection system as opposed to the bag building mixed in with it. I really enjoy War Chest, but to a degree, I guess, because I like some aspects of it while not liking others. For me, this is a 3.5 out of 5. A solid game that is very well loved by many, but for me, just left it a bit short because of that abstract versus luck-based approach. As far as other game recommendations, first of all, Undaunted Normandy. Undaunted Normandy, or any of the Undaunted series from the same designers, give you the same basic idea of the game, and while thematically and feeling-wise and production value I prefer War Chest, I think from a pure gameplay perspective, I tend to feel a little bit more agency and control out of the Undaunted experience. Both of them are very similar, but I think I have a slight preference towards Undaunted. And then additionally, if you're looking for something that gives you a similar feeling of kind of all that luck-based bag building approach, but with a very different game behind it, I really enjoy Blitzkrieg. Blitzkrieg is a two-player experience, head-to-head experience, as you try to fight for over different lanes of battles, you try to fight over different theaters, trying to win those theaters, getting more perks, upgrading slowly but surely, has a degree of luck and bag building, but in a way that is very different, and for me, slightly preferred to War Chest. In any case, until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. I hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, I hope you have a good one.